Today we're going to talk about how to solve problems that involve circles, either stated or geometry problems. So there are some formulas for circles that we're going to need to know. Whenever we want to find the distance all the way around a circle, basically the perimeter of our circle, what we're going to be finding is called the circumference. And the way that you calculate the circumference is to take the distance across your entire circle, which is what we call the diameter, and multiply it by a value called pi. Okay, so diameter, which we'll represent it with a d, times pi. And pi is a Greek letter that represents the value of 3.14159, and it keeps going. It's an irrational number. It never ends, and it does not repeat. And pi is just the relationship between the diameter across and the circumference around your circle. Now, if you're not given the diameter, if you're just given halfway across your circle, okay, the distance from the middle of your circle to the edge is what we call the radius. The radius is half the diameter of your circle. And so another way you can write that you're going to find the circumference is to multiply 2 times the radius, which is the same as your diameter, and multiply that times pi. So either way, you can find the distance around your entire circle. Now, if we want to find the area of our circle, we have another formula for area. And in order to work with this one, we have to know the radius. So area is equal to pi r squared. And you have to square your radius before you multiply by pi. So if you're given the diameter, you would still multiply by pi, but you would have to divide your diameter by 2 before you square, because that will give us our radius squared. So we can use either one of these formulas depending on what our question is asking of us. So let's go ahead and take a look at number 1. What is the circumference of a circle with a diameter that measures 72.25 centimeters? So be sure and make sure your units are the same in both the problem and your answer blank, and they are. We want to find the circumference, which is the distance around our circle. Circumference is pi times the diameter. So we have pi times 72.25. And if you're typing it into the HP calculator, you're going to hit orange pi. It's on the cos button for cosine, but orange pi. Then you would do 72.25 and then hit the times key. And whenever you do that, you end up with 2.27 times 10 to the second power. If you move your decimal over twice, you also get an answer of 227. Question number 2, we want to calculate the circumference, again circumference, of a circular field with a radius of 5 87/100. So first we have to look and see that 5 87/100, if we write it out, is 5.87. And that's our radius. To find the circumference, we need pi times the diameter, which is the same as 2 of the radii. So we're going to have pi, so hit orange shift cos to get pi to come up. And then we want to multiply it by 2. So we'll hit 2 times. And then we want our radius, 5.87 times. And whenever you multiply all of that, you should end up with a value of 3.69 times 10 to the first, which you move your decimal over to the right one place, you get 36.9. Okay. Those are stated problems, and either the first or second page. You'll see number 12 will be found on the first page, 26 will be on the second page, or even the third page, I believe. So they're found in different places on the test. The geometry problems, you'll notice these are all question number 37. They will most often appear in that location on the test. So question 3, we have the circumference given to us and we want to find the radius. So remember, circumference is pi times diameter. So we know the value for C. We know it's 27.88, and we know it's pi times some unknown value for our diameter. So we have to do a little bit of algebra. If we want to solve for d, we have to undo the math that's going on between it and pi. Pi and the diameter are being multiplied. So the opposite of multiplication would be division. So we're going to divide both sides by pi. And whenever we do this over here on the right-hand side, pi and pi will reduce out, and we'll just be left with our diameter. And so the diameter is equal to 27.88 divided by pi. So in your calculator, you do 27.88, orange pi, and then divide. And that value gives you that word gives you the diameter. That's the distance all the way across your circle. But we just want the radius. We just want half of that. So then we need to divide by 2. So you type the 2 first, of course, 2 divide, and we end up with a value of the radius of 4.44. Your answer Q will also have 4.44 times 10 to the 0, but do not write times 10 to the 0. It's telling you you're moving your decimal place over 0 times, so why bother writing it if you don't have to? Question 4. We have a radius given to us, and we want to find the area. Remember, area is pi r squared. So we'll take our radius, 5.275, and then we're going to hit blue x squared. That's going to give us the value for the radius squared, and then we need to multiply it by pi. So we're going to hit orange pi times. Ultimately, what you're really looking at is pi times 5.275 squared. And whenever you follow that process in your calculator, we end up with 8.74 times 10 to the first, which is also 87.4. Okay, number 5. We have the diameter 72.11, and we want to find the area. So area is pi r squared. We need the radius, but we have the diameter. So we're going to take our diameter and divide it by 2. And that's going to give us our radius. So then we can square that and multiply it times pi. And that'll give us 4.08 times 10 to the third, or 4080. Okay, number 6. Our area is 612 pi, and our area we know is equal to pi r squared. Whenever you have pi on both sides that's being multiplied on both sides, that means that it will reduce out, or it basically cancels out on both sides. So what you're left with is 612 is our radius squared. And think about, how do you undo a square? We have to take the square root. So in your calculator, you would just type 612 square root of x, and that will give us our radius, our distance halfway across the circle. But we want the diameter, so we have to hit 2 times. And whenever we do that, we get 4.95 times 10 to the first, which is 49.5. If we want to write this out a little bit differently, we're going to have the square root of 612 times 2. And that's what you're going through this process typing in. Okay, number 7. The area of a circle is 17.11 pi square inches. What is the measure of the diameter? And that's going to be in inches. Whenever you have an area, you're going to have a unit that has a little 2 up at the top. That just means that it's that unit squared. It's the area. If it was cubed, that would be volume. So since that's inches squared, if we find the linear distance across, that will be in inches, and it will match the unit that we need. So we're going to start with area, which is pi r squared, which is equal to 17.11 pi. The pi is on both sides, so it will cancel out since we're multiplying on each side. So our radius squared is 17.11. To undo the square, we take the square root. So we need the square root of 17.11. That gets us the radius. Then we need to take the radius and multiply it by 2 to find the diameter. And that's going to be 8.27. And it would be times 10 to the 0, so it's just going to be 8.27. Okay, number 8, the area of a circle is 534 square inches. So area is 534, which we know is pi r squared. And we want to find the diameter. So it's almost the same as the last one, except for we don't have a pi on both sides that we can cancel out. So first we need to deal with pi. Since it's being multiplied on the right-hand side of our equation, we have to do the opposite to move it to the other side. We're going to have to divide by pi, because when we do that to both sides, it's going to cancel out there. So we have 534 divided by pi, and then that's r squared. So to undo our square, we have to square root, and that's our radius. But we don't want the radius, we want the diameter. So once you find what r is equal, then you need to multiply it times 2. That will double it to get your diameter, which will be 2.61 times 10 to the first, which you can also write as 26.1. Okay, let's move on to the second page. What is the ratio of the area of the area to the circumference of a circle with a radius that measures 7.821? Now, whenever it says you want a ratio, that means we're going to have to divide whatever is mentioned first by whatever is mentioned second. So we want the ratio of the area to the circumference. So the first thing we underline tells us what's going to go on top. To the means it's where we're going to divide, and then our circumference will be on the bottom. So we could go ahead and write our formula for each and plug in our 7.821, find the area, find the circumference, and divide. But we can actually save a little bit of work by canceling out some of our units along the way. So let's go and write our formula for each of these. Area is pi r squared. Circumference is 2 times the diameter. Oh, no, I apologize. That's incorrect. Get the eraser. Circumference is going to be pi times the diameter. Just wrote and said the wrong thing. Now, we only have one thing that cancels out at that point. We have pi on top and bottom. So let's go and cross those off. Now, we can rewrite r squared, and we can rewrite d to where all we have are r's, and maybe some numbers. But r squared just means r times r, a number times itself. The diameter, remember, is going to be twice the radius, 2 times r. So now we have an r on top and an r on the bottom that can reduce out. And we're left with our ratio as being the radius divided by 2. So our radius, we're told, is 7.821. Enter, 2, divide. And if you're writing it out, it would be 7.821 over 2. So whenever you put that into your calculator, you end up with 3.91. It'll be times 10 to the 0 power, so we'll just leave 3.91. Okay, circle T has a radius of 12.18 centimeters. Circle M has a radius of 7.72 centimeters. What is the ratio of the area of circle T? So we want the area of circle T to the, that means divide, circumference of circle M. So we want the circumference of circle M. So area is pi r squared. Circumference is pi times diameter. Again, pi is the same in both of those. The radius and diameter are going to be different because we have different sized circles. But pi is pi. So we can go ahead and get rid of those and just deal with r and d. So the radius of circle T is going to be 12.18. And we want to square that. The diameter of circle M will be 7.72 times 2, because 7.72 is just the radius. We have to multiply it by 2 to get the diameter. So whenever you do that math in your calculator, you end up with our answer. To put it into the HP calculator, you would do 12.18, blue shift, and then you'd hit the button that has x squared on it. That will square our top value. You don't have to push enter after that. It automatically does it. Then we're going to do 2, enter, 7.72, and then we're multiplying between those two numbers. So we'll hit the times key, And then this line going across means divide, so we'll hit the divide key. And that will get us an answer then for number 10 of 9.61. Okay, number 11. Calculate the area of a circle with a circumference of 823.15 feet. So we want to find area, and we're given the circumference. So to find the area, we need the radius. So we're going to have to work backwards from the circumference to get the radius, and then plug that into our area formula. So circumference is pi times the diameter, which is going to be pi times 2r. So our circumference is 823.15. So to leave r by itself over here, we have to undo the math of the numbers in front of it. You're multiplying by pi and multiplying by 2, so that means that we need to divide by pi and by 2. And that will leave us with just what our radius is. So in your calculator, you have 823.15, enter. Then you're going to have pi, so you hit orange cos to get pi to show up. And then we want to have 2 pi, so we'll do 2 times. That takes care of the multiplication down here at the bottom. And then we want to divide by that. So we'll push the divide key. And that gets us our radius. And remember, our formula for area is pi r squared. So we have the radius in our calculator, so we need to square it. So we're just going to hit blue shift x squared. And then we need to multiply by pi. So we'll just bring up pi and then multiply. And we're going to get an answer then of 5.39 times 10 to the 4th, which if we move our decimal to the right 4 places, will give us 53900. Okay, number 12. Similar problem, only we have a picture instead of it written out entirely in words. We have the circumference given and we want to find the area. So, we saw before, we were going to take our circumference, divide it by 2 pi. And that will leave us with our radius. So 0.0058 enter, 2 enter, pi times divide, and that gets us our radius. Then we need to square our radius, and we need to multiply by pi because our area is pi r squared. We have our radius here squared times pi. It doesn't matter whether pi is in the front or pi is at the end. Multiplication is multiplication. So we end up with an answer of 2.68 times 10 to the negative 6th. And you wouldn't want to go ahead and move your decimal back to the left 6 times. You would have too many zeros to write down. So we'll just go ahead and write it in the scientific notation form. Okay, number 13. We have circumference, we want area. Same type of problem as the last one. So circumference divided by 2 pi will give us our radius. So we want to do pi r squared. So we take our radius and square it and multiply by pi. And we end up with 1.01, sorry, times 10 to the 5th, which if you go ahead and move your decimal over to the right 5 times, would be 101,000. And I don't think that's too many zeros. I would probably go ahead and write those out. When you get to about 10 to the 6th power is when I would stop writing them. But 10 to the 5th will be okay to write out. Either way. Okay, the next couple of problems are the exact same type. You take your circumference, divide it by 2 pi, that gets you your radius. We want to do pi r squared, so we take our radius, square it, multiply times pi. And we get a value of 2.80 times 10 to the 6th. Same problem, 0.019 is our circumference. We divide it by 2 pi to find our radius. We want to do pi r squared. So we multiply the square of that radius times pi, and you end up with 2.87 times 10 to the negative 5th. Okay, moving on along. 16, same type of problem. So you can see these are all from the last 2 years, from the 13-14 and 12-13 school years. So if you're familiar with this type of problem, chances are you will see it in the future. Circumference divided by 2 pi Gets us the radius. We want pi r squared, radius squared, times pi will get us a value of 2.65 times 10 to the second, which will be the same as 265. When you move the decimal over to the right the 2 times. Okay, number 17, we have a semicircle, which is going to be half of a circle, exactly half. And they give us the radius, and they want us to find the perimeter. So we're going to do one of the things we normally do. We're going to find the circumference, but then we're just going to take half of it. So we're going to go ahead and find our diameter, because remember, circumference is pi times diameter. So we take our radius, and we're going to multiply it times 2. That gets us our diameter, and then we're going to multiply times pi. And that will give us the distance all the way around the circle if we had a whole circle. But since we only have a semicircle, we want to divide what we got by 2. So we'll divide all of that by 2. And that will get us just this part here. But that's not the entire perimeter, is it? We also have this diameter that goes across that we need to add in. So remember, diameter is 2 times the radius. So whatever we got for our answer here, we're going to add to that 2 times 123.45. So you have half the circumference, and then you have to add the diameter across. And you end up with 6.35 times 10 to the second, which is the same as 635. Okay. Got a few more semicircles. We've got the diameter, and we want to find out what the perimeter is. Very similar to the last one. You still have to find half of your circumference. So circumference is pi times diameter. But then we're going to want to have to divide it by 2 to get it for a semicircle. So we have pi times 53.9 divided by 2. And that gets us the arc. And we then need to add in our distance across, our diameter. So we'll add the 53.9. And we get a perimeter of 1.39 times 10 to the second power, which is the same as 139. Okay, we've got to work backwards on this one. They give us the perimeter and ask for the radius. So we're going to have a variable that we're going to have to be solving for. So let's write out an equation for what we would be doing to find the perimeter in terms of r. Okay? In fact, and let's go ahead and work with diameter, and then we can go back and we can find the radius from the diameter. So circumference of a semicircle is pi times diameter over 2. And then to find the perimeter, we have to then add another diameter, right? So if we look at this algebraically, okay, our perimeter all the way around is 587. That's equal to pi over 2 times our diameter. You can go ahead and separate your pi over 2 like that. And you're adding to that 1 diameter, correct? Now, you can factor out our variable that's common in both of these. We can factor out the d. So we have 587 is equal to d times, and then we're going to divide each part that we have here by d. So take this section. If we divide it by d, we're left with just pi over 2. And if we take just this section and divide it by d, we're left with just 1. And then the math in between that was a plus sign, so we're going to write a plus in between them. Now we can do that in parentheses in our calculator. We can pull up pi, 3.14159, blah, blah, blah. We can divide it by 2, and then we can add 1 to it. And you should end up with like 2.57-ish. Okay? So in your calculator, if we're trying to figure out what d is, you have to start with your 587, enter, and then we have to divide by our set of parentheses here. Divide by pi over 2 plus 1. So 587, enter, orange pi, 2 divide, 1 plus, divide. And that will get us a value of d, our diameter. But since we don't just want the diameter, we want the radius, we have to then divide by 2. So in your calculator, you would just do divide 2, and that will get us an answer then of 1.14 times 10 to the second. You can move your decimal over twice and end up with 114. A little bit more complicated version, but it came from one of the tests later on in the school year. So moving on to quarter circles. Quarter circle is just 1/4 of our circle, half of half. And they tell us that the arc from point A to point B is 777. So this distance here, which is 1/4 of our circumference, is 777. And we want to find what the area of that little segment is. So first we need to find the area, because our area is going to be 1/4 pi r squared. Whatever the area of that entire circle would be, we just want to know 1/4 of it. So if we take our 777 and multiply it times 4, that will get us our entire circumference, which is equal to pi times the diameter. So we do 777, enter, 4 times, and then remember to move pi to the other side, we have to divide by it. So once you've divided by pi, that's your diameter. But to find the area, remember we need radius. So you're going to take your answer that you got for the top part here, and you want to divide it by 2. That gets us our radius. Then we want to square it. Then we want to multiply by pi. And then we want to take 1/4 of it. So remember, one of the ways you can type in a fraction to your calculator, you can do decimal 1, decimal 4, and that will make a fraction come up that you can multiply by. And you should also know that 1/4 is the same as 0.25. That's the decimal part. So you could also multiply by 0.25. So kind of summarize here. I'll write this all a little bit clearer. This distance here was 777. So we took 777 and we multiplied it by 4 to get our entire circumference. We divided it by pi to find our diameter, and then we divided by 2 to find the radius from the diameter. And then we wanted to do 1/4 pi r squared. So this was our radius. We square it. Then we multiply by pi, and we multiply by 1/4. And once you do all of that in your calculator, we end up with our final answer, which is 1.92 times 10 to the 5th. And we can go ahead and move our decimal over to the right 5 times if you'd like, and you get 192,000. So once you start taking parts of your circle away, it gets a little bit more difficult, but it's the same basic idea. You're just dealing with 1/4 of it. Okay, our quarter circle has a perimeter of 211, and we want to find out what the radius is. So we don't have to worry about area on this one. We're just looking at the perimeter and the radius. Our perimeter will be 1/4 of our circumference, and then we have 2 radii that we have to add to it. And remember, 2 radii is the same as a diameter, right? So we're going to have our perimeter equal to 1/4 pi diameter, that's our circumference, plus a diameter. And we're going to have to do like we did earlier, and we're going to have to factor out that d. So we're going to have 211 equals, and we'll go ahead and put the d, and then we have to figure out what's left behind on each one of those. So if we divide this by d, we're left with 1/4 pi. And if we divide this by d, we're left with just 1. D divided by d is 1. And then whatever math is going on in between them, we have to keep that sign there. So 211 is equal to our diameter times 1/4 pi plus 1. So between these two guys is multiplication. We need to do the opposite of multiplication then to solve for d, and we need to divide by what's in our parentheses. So you're going to have 211, enter. Then you're going to have 1/4. You can either type in 0.25, or you can do 0.1, 0.4 to get the fraction to show up. Then you would hit enter. Then we need to bring up pi. orange pi, and you need to multiply those. Then you need to type in 1, and then you're going to add it, so hit plus. And then once you get that sum on the bottom, then you have to hit divide to divide it into the 211. That is equal to our diameter. But we want our radius, so from our diameter to our radius, we just divide by 2. And we end up then with a radius of 59.1, or in your calculator it would be 5.91 times 10 to the first. Okay, number 22, we have a 3/4 circle. We have the radius, and we want to find the perimeter. This one's going to be a little bit easier. We need to find 3/4 of the circumference, and then we're going to add 2 radii to it. So circumference is pi times the diameter, which is 2 times r for the diameter, right? So our circumference for 3/4 of our circle would be 3/4 pi 2 times our radius. And that gets us the body part of our Pac-Man, the circumference around. And then we need to add 2 radii. So we're going to add to this 2 times 0.021. And once we add those 2 radii, we end up with 1.41 times 10 to the negative first, which if you take your decimal and move it back to the left one time, you could also write it as 0.141. 23 is also a 3/4 circle, and we're doing the opposite process. We have the perimeter given, and we want to find the radius. So we're going to go ahead and find the diameter, and then from the diameter we can get our radius. Very similar to how we just set up the other one, only we're working backwards. We have 3/4 pi times diameter plus our diameter. 2 times the radius would be our diameter. And that's equal to 572. So since we have d in 2 different places, we have to do like we did before and factor it out. So whenever you factor out d from this part, you're left with 3/4 pi. When you factor d out from here, you're left with 1. And then the math in between those was a plus sign. So you're left with d that you factored out, and that's equal to 572. So since you're multiplying here, to undo the multiplication, remember we have to divide. So we'll have 572 divided by 3/4 pi plus 1. And that will move it over to that side. So 572 enter. I would do 0.75 for 3/4. You need to know that decimal. So 0.75, bring up pi, orange pi, then times to multiply that, and 1 plus divide. And that will get us our diameter. We want the radius then, so that means we have to divide our diameter by 2. And we end up with a radius of 8.52 times 10 to the first, or 85.2. Okay, the last thing we're going to look at are circle sectors. Sections that are not a 1/4, 3/4, 1/2. They're a little bit more complicated, but not too bad. We want to find the area of our sector that has 51 degrees taken out of it. So you need to know how many degrees are in a whole circle. In an entire circle, you have 360 degrees. So if we take away 51 degrees from that, we're going to be left with 309 degrees. So our area that we have is actually 309 out of 360 parts that are possible. So if we're just going to find the area of the entire circle, it's just pi r squared. Pi times our radius, which is 17.9, squared. But we don't want all 360 degrees. We only want 309 out of those 360. So it's a fraction that we're going to be multiplying by. So I would probably just start with the radius, do 17.9 squared, bring up pi and multiply it, and then you need to multiply by this fraction part. go decimal 309, decimal 360 would be how you could get that fraction to show up, and then you can just hit times. And that will give you the portion of the area that's not the wedge, the 51 degrees that's taken out. We're left with 8.64 times 10 to the second, or 864. Okay, number 25, similar problem, only now we have 150 degrees that are taken out. So let's see how many degrees we have left. We have 360 degrees total, minus 150 degrees removed, and we're going to be left with 210 degrees for the area we want to find. So we're going to have pi r squared, but we're only going to want 210 degrees out of the 360 possible degrees. Times pi times our radius squared. So remember, you have to square the radius, then multiply by pi, and then decimal 210, decimal 360 times. And you can do that in any order. You could start with the fraction, then multiply times pi, then do your radius, square it, and then multiply. It's all multiplication going across. You just need to be sure that you are only squaring the radius. You don't want to multiply the radius by something else and then square it. It's the radius only that's being squared there. And you end up with 4.21 times 10 to the 6th power. Okay? Moving on to question number 26. We have a sector angle of 20 degrees, so we don't have to figure out the angle. It's given to us that this is only 20 degrees. So we're going to have 20 out of 360 times pi times our radius squared, and our radius is given to us as pi. So we're going to have pi squared. If you have pi times pi squared, that's the same thing as pi cubed. So the way that you would type that into the HP calculator, you could do decimal 20, decimal 360, enter. Then you'd bring up pi, orange pi. And since we want to do it to the 3rd power, you would type in a 3, and then you would hit the y to the x button. And that would raise pi to the 3rd power. And then you want to multiply it by the fraction you typed in at the beginning. So you would just hit the times key. And you end up with an area then of 1.72. And it's times 10 to the 0, so just leave it 1.72. Okay, number 27, we have the area given and we want to work backwards to find our radius. So if we have 105 degrees removed, we do 360 minus 105. So we're going to be left with 255 degrees. So our area is equal to 255 out of 360 times pi times the radius squared. Now, we have numbers on the right-hand side with the r, so we need to do the opposite of the multiplication that's going on. We need to divide by them. So we're going to start with our area, 100.001, and then we're going to have to divide by 255 over 360 times pi. And that's equal to r squared. So remember, to undo a square, we have to do the opposite. We're going to do the square root. So in your HP, you would do 100.001, enter, decimal 255, decimal 360, orange pi, times, divide, square root key. And we end up with a radius then of 6.70. Again, times 10 to the 0, so just leave it. Last couple, we have a 32-degree circle sector. We have the radius of 0.0111, and we want to find the perimeter. So our perimeter will be the circumference of this little section, adding 2 radii to it. So circumference is pi times the diameter, which is 2 times our radius, which is 0.0111. But that would be the entire circumference, and we don't want the distance all the way around. We just want to know what the distance is for that little section that we have. And so we're going to multiply that by 32 out of 360. And that will get us the curved part of our perimeter. And then we want to add to that our 2 radii, which would be our diameter, but 2 times 0.0111. And we end up with a perimeter then of 2.84 times 10 to the negative second, or 0.0284. And on the answer key for these tests, you will notice that there's a 0 printed in front of your decimal, and you don't have to print that 0 in front. You can, but you definitely do not have to. You just need to be sure that if you're not, that you're making your decimal very obvious. The grader should be able to tell that it's there and that it's not a negative sign. Be careful, your decimals and your negatives don't look the same. Okay, last one, number 29. What is the length of a 72 40-minute arc on a circle with a diameter of 21.85 inches, and given the fact that 60 minutes is equal to 1 degree? So degrees can be broken up. If you have 1 degree, it can be broken down into 60 seconds, or 60 minutes, sorry, 60 minutes, and then a minute can be broken down into 60 seconds as well. So just like an hour is broken down into minutes and seconds, degrees can be broken down into those as well. Same names, but they're talking about different things. It's not going to be time. We're talking about the distance between those in terms of an angle. Okay? So we're going to start with finding the circumference of our entire circle. Because if we want just an arc, okay, it's going to look something like this. We want to find the entire circumference, so we can find just that section of it. So we have a diameter of 21.85 inches, so circumference is pi times diameter, so we're going to have pi times 21.85. And that gets us the entire distance around, but we don't want all of this. We want just the section that's on our segment. And so what you're going to need to do is take our angle that we know, it's 72, and since there's 60 minutes in a degree, we have 40 minutes. It's going to be 40 out of 60. So 72 and 40 60ths, that's going to be in degrees over how many degrees there are in a circle, 360. So the angle that we have over the total possible angle for the entire circle, and that gets us the length of just that arc. And since it didn't ask for the perimeter, it just asked for the length of the arc, that's going to be our answer. And that's going to be 1.39 times 10 to the first, or we move our decimal over one time, we get 13.9. I hope you learned how to use the radius and the diameter to find circumference and area of circles, circle segments, semicircles, all of those types of things. And we will look at some more shapes in the future.